Are seed oils bad for your health? Simon Hill weighs in.
What's your current take on seed oils? Any reason to avoid them in moderation?
Define moderation. That is a relative term. You wouldn't tell an alcoholic to moderate their alcohol because then it would be left to the alcoholic to determine what moderation means. So you need to define whatever. It's someone else asking a question, so it is informal, whatever. But he's using this question and putting it up on his videos, so that's why I say that. But anyway.
I love how this just always continues to pop up. As long as you aren't deep frying them, then there is no reason to be concerned.
Well, that is your opinion. I would say the exact, precise opposite for a few reasons. Number one, Simon, the reason that you say that, well, as long as you're not frying them, that they're not a problem is because, well, ostensibly, it's because of the fact that whenever you fry them, you are creating more and more oxidation products, but you completely fail to understand that whenever they are manufactured under high heat and pressure, there's oxidation products in them. Then what happens is they sit out in the sun for however many months, sometimes over a year, maybe even multiple years, I don't know. They are sitting in the sun and oxidizing even more, and then whenever you buy them, you cook with them, so you're oxidizing them a third time. And then whenever you eat them, they get oxidized again, because whenever you consume food, you're consuming mass in the forms of carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and alcohol, and chemically interacting them under control with molecular oxygen. That's literally what you were doing. It's why we create reactive oxygen species. Oxygen itself is extremely reactive. So we have to produce antioxidants endogenously, and then also with the assistance of some that are found in food, but also ones that are really not found in food at all, like the ones you derive from the earth when grounding electrically, which isn't voodoo pseudoscience, okay? This is a real thing. We have grounding ports for a reason. There's a negative charge from the earth. The earth has a negative charge, and we acquire those electrons through grounding, through forming an electrical connection between ourselves and the earth, whether it be directly on the earth or whether it be through something that functions as a conductor, like copper wire that's in my grounding mats in front of me. And those electrons function as antioxidants effectively, considering the fact that oxidation is the loss of electrons. So anyway, that's one reason, not to mention that there's also deuterium, separate issue, which slows the rate at which your mitochondria function. You are designed to have some deuterium in your diet, evinced by the fact that there's deuterium in everything. But beyond what our genes most evolved to genotypically withstand, I suspect, I would posit that you're risking mitochondrial health and perhaps even carcinogenesis, actually, based on what we know about how cancer works and how it's involved with a slowing of the rate at which the mitochondria function. Check out a video I just did on this a little while ago called Why Cancer Cells Love Sugar. And since we're objective on the channel, don't get carried away with that. Just because cancer cells use glucose that itself is not a reason to not consume it. There's many others that I put forth. That's not enough at all, actually. But the biochemistry behind it is interesting, and it has some implications there. So then there's that, and then also how long were we exposed to that high of an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, first of all, but also just the absolute level of polyunsaturated fats in there. How long, genotypically as a species? Because it wasn't very long at all. And according to the Darwinian principles of evolution and the subsequent principles of indication that you derive from those, well, if the genes within a genome, within a species, have not withstood a stimulus for long enough to have become genotypically adapted to that stimulus, then that stimulus is a deviation from what is appropriate for their species and therefore poses a risk to the organism. Seed oils are just one of those. And when we talk about food, we're talking about effects on our genes that are, well, extremely intimate, let's say, and far more serious and critical. It's effectively genetic coding for an organism, food, the things that you actually consume, as opposed to other genetic stimulants or stimuli rather, like climate-controlled environments. Yes, that's also a deviation from what's ancestrally consistent, but that's a little different than food. Check out a video that I did on that as well a few months back called Modern Life is an Experiment. So anyway, Simon, those are many reasons to not consume them. Notice how I didn't mention any associations with negative heart health outcomes. Notice how I didn't do that at all. Because as much as those can give some ideas, those aren't as hard of inferences as the ones that I just put forth. They're not. Those are supporting pieces that can reinforce it, because in isolation, those are quite ambiguous, actually.
Fear-mongering online.
What about it, Simon? The stuff that I suspect that you engage in? Listen, I'm not very familiar with Simon Hill. I've heard his name many, many times. I've never watched him before. However, the bits that I have seen of him, if you want to consider that watching, fine, but I've been slightly exposed to him. He seems like a curious, well-intentioned guy. However, the more and more that I react to these videos and have these opinions before people just go errantly off the reservation of logic and reason, and also curiosity and humility, the more jaded I become to having that opinion in the first place, having that preconceived notion of the person I'm reacting to. So I'm going to be a little more careful. I'm going to say exactly what I think, which is, well, he seems well-intentioned. He seems curious. So let's hope he is. Let's just hope he is. Unfortunately, I have my doubts, though, because of my experiences with entertaining these figures in the plant-based sphere. So I just want to say that out loud before we get going any further.
Seed oils is driven by emotions, not data.
What do you mean by data? Simon, if you mean human nutrition science, well, that's where you went wrong, buddy. Because human nutrition science, as much as you might believe that this opinion is proof of my anti-scientific nature or my science denier nature, is by definition not science. Because you see, the thing is that science requires control. I'm very familiar with what science is. In fact, I understand what a responsible scientist does and does not do. I understand what is responsible reporting and what isn't responsible reporting. I also know what is responsible methodology and what isn't responsible methodology. One of the fundamental tenets of scientific rigor is control. In human nutrition science, there is no such thing as control. In theory there is, but it's not in practice because it cannot be done in practice. The reason for that is because all human beings are genotypically and phenotypically different from each other. Human nutrition science is based on inferential statistics that involves basically inferring things about an entire population based on one sample. I made a video about this a while back, actually, talking about how that is inferential statistics is therefore based on it is fundamentally flawed. It is flawed. You cannot perform a study on one sample and then extrapolate the results of that sample to an entire population. You can't responsibly do that. That is actually why the scientific community, at least the responsible proponents of it, advocate emphatically the importance of repeatability in your studies, which is a sort of a gauge of how strong your signal was that you actually derived from your studying. Except most people, and this is why thousands of papers are taken out of the literature, actually, in like every year, because of the lack of repeatability, and also p-hacking, which is just, you want to talk about misleading and fraudulent behavior. All that stuff is involved in there. Human nutrition science is therefore theology. You can base opinions off of it. Theology absolutely has its place. I know a lot of people want to pretend like that's just fantastical. Then theology, it's all fantastical. I mean, psychoanalytic theory, the studying psychology of people, we've learned a lot from that, and that's seen in marketing. That's seen in how people communicate with one another. That has utility, but you have to be careful with how you report it. You can't report it as fact. You can report it as an opinion. So what you're saying right now, if you're going to sit here and pretend like your opinions that you hold, your ideological positions are based on anything except opinions, if you're going to base it out of human nutrition science, well, that's irresponsible, and it's showing a level of ignorance that is unacceptable, especially with your level of following. So, Simon, I presume that is what you mean by data, and I'm going to be extremely disappointed if that opinion of mine, that presumption of mine rather, is reinforced, is validated by what you say next.
Was comprehensively summarized in my recent episode with Dr. Bill Harris, which I will link to in the show notes. In short, if you didn't catch that episode, the overwhelming body of evidence suggests...
Body of evidence? Okay, so from what field? Because evidence is a very vague term. I presume once again that he's referring to human nutrition science. And notice the word that he said, suggests. That is a responsible reporting word, suggests, because that's really a value judgment statement, and it's conditional upon the author's opinion or the promulgator's, in this case, opinion. Because if I were to look at this data, I would say that it really doesn't suggest that, most likely. So that's why the word suggest is actually a good word to use here, because it represents ambiguity. It represents, the it conveys to the audience that it is up for interpretation. It is not sound, concrete evidence. So, suggest was a good word. Good job, Simon.
Unsaturated fats, particularly polyunsaturated fats.
Well, that's also vague, because when we talk about seed oils, they're not just polyunsaturated fats or unsaturated fats. They are extremely rancid. That introduces a new concern. The primary concern, in my opinion, with these oils, actually. The oxidation products, like primarily aldehydes, which even in vastly small concentrations will destroy lipid rafts. They will effectively tear cell membranes to smithereens. They will bind to DNA and actively cause mutations to it. And in a high enough concentration, actually, they will just kill a cell outright and cause it to have to replace itself. So those aren't things that we should really be consuming, because how often were we really having aldehydes, especially in the amount that's found in seed oils as a species? Well, it's a very minimal amount of time. So that's why we say just don't consume them. So when you want to reduce it to just being polyunsaturated, monounsaturated, I mean, then you're going to introduce the possibility, and I would suspect a very strong possibility, that the data that you're considering was actually looking at polyunsaturates from maybe avocado, from maybe nuts and seeds that people were eating. When you say monounsaturated, unsaturated fats as a whole, now you've also introduced monounsaturated fats, which are the primary fat found in animal products, for example. Now you're going to be introducing a bunch of studies, or at least you've given yourself the permission to refer to studies that include monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats that are accounted for in non-seed oil derivatives like other plants. And then that introduces healthy user bias as a possibility as to why these studies may have shown, longer lifespan in terms of an incidence rate as compared to maybe another cohort, if it's a prospective cohort study that you're referring to. Again, you're not being very clear as to what evidence you're referring to, so that's why I'm entertaining all those possibilities. So you've got epidemiology, which involves just strictly observational studies with a scatter plot, X, Y, whatever. But then you've also got, studied on one population. But then you've also got prospective cohort studies where it's a comparison between two populations, or maybe even more. Oftentimes you can see four, sort of put into quartiles as to level of meat consumption, whatever it may be. And then you've got randomized controlled trials, which aren't controlled, and oftentimes they're not properly randomized, because randomized and controlled are tightly intertwined. And I mean, you've got many other types of studies. So if you're referring to all of those, well, all of those have different utilities. So anyway, Maybe this would be the time where you say, oh, well, this is why you should refer to the video I'm referring to. In which case, fine, fair enough. But I don't have the time for that.
which includes omega-6s, are health promoting.
No, because the science can't inform upon that. Because health promoting is a cause and effect statement. The promotion of health, health being the absence of disease process, necessarily indicates that it itself, omega-6 fatty acids, irrespective of the form, by the way, we already covered that. That's your implication here, are causally correlated with a reduction in negative heart health outcomes. That is what that means on a purely, strictly scientific basis. So, no, it doesn't. Whether I like that or not, whether you like that or not, it doesn't matter. Okay? This, by the way, also means that when you are referring to human nutrition science, you cannot point to a study that indicates the exact opposite and say that it shows that they are deleterious to your health. You refer to other inferences to make that conclusion, and even then, it is highly noisy and therefore theoretical and speculative, which is why I've always said that the defensive arguments for carnivore are actually stronger. I think there's a stronger case to make for the defensive arguments for carnivore, so defending the position against people like Simon here they're a lot stronger than the offensive arguments for carnivore. I'm not saying that the offensive arguments aren't strong. I think that many of them actually are. However, I think that if you're going to compare them, the defensive arguments are actually stronger because most of the time you're on the defense. Many people, you might be one of them. If you've been carnivore for long enough, you understand that most of the time you're on the defense because these people will say exactly what you just said. Oh, well, the overwhelming body of evidence suggests this. They start throwing studies at you, and it's up to you to basically, real steel it out, okay, against Zeus here, and just basically keep your hands up in front of your head, okay, because until you have the opportunity, once they're worn out, to really start throwing things back at them. Any real steel fans out there? Anyway, yeah. Adam!
This body of evidence includes studies where you measure omega-6 levels in the blood and fat stores of humans and you monitor them over time. You track their health over time.
Well, okay, so that has nothing to do. That is a very, very weak inference. Also, how long were these people tracked for? What were the health outcomes that were actually observed? If you're going to say that they were health promoting, you can't just look at the health outcomes. You have to look at whether or not it was conducive. It was really causally correlated with a reduction in already present disease processes. But anyway, we also need to know how long the studies went on for. And this was clearly, so this was this observational then? Not to mention that doesn't consider the possibility that the amount of omega-6 that is found in certain cells, what cells are we talking about, is also going to be dependent on genotypic propensity for storing those. Your genotypic set point for how many omega-6 fats that you have in your cells, even in the context of never consuming them from seed oils or plants ever, under any circumstances. And also phenotypic adaptation to whatever they're doing before. So again, you can make the opinion. I'm not saying that these have no utility, although this one seems quite weak. But you have to be careful with how you convey it. That's my entire point.
Greater amounts of linoleic acid in their tissues, the primary omega-6 fat that is in our diet and in seed oils.
Whose diet? Because, well, that depends, doesn't it? But okay, fine. Even in a meat-based diet, I'd have to look, but you get very little polyunsaturated fats from that diet. I don't know which one is the primary one, if it's DHA, EPA, or linoleic acid, whatever it may be. It also is going to depend on what meat-based diet you're having, because if you're having a lot of pork, then I would suspect that he's probably correct in your case. But anyway, okay, fine.
Are healthier and they live longer. That is
okay. So what does that have anything to do with whether or not they're healthier, Simon? And again, with the word healthy and unhealthy, it's indicated or contraindicated. Contraindicated. Buy now. Link in the description below for the second edition of this book of mine in paperback, hardcover, ebook, and also self-narrated audiobook editions, because I'm all about authenticity. Because I'm indicated as they say. Merch available in the description below as well. You can get your hands on this too. So, anyway, yeah, it's all about what's indicated according to the Darwinian principles of evolution, Simon, which is the prevailing scientific theory for a reason. I'm not saying it is fact, per se. What I usually say is that it is technically, very technically, a theory, but not just a theory. That's how I'll put it, which I think is an appropriate assessment of the information at hand. But other people might have different opinions, and that's the beauty of opinions. You can all have different ones, and then it's up for the majority of people. Well, it's up for everyone else to determine whether or not it's foolish in their opinions. Yeah, so just because these people had greater or longer lifespans and better heart health outcomes as compared to other groups doesn't mean that the omega-6 was the culprit. It doesn't even mean that their diet per se was the reductionist factor here. What else were these people doing? I mean, are you referring to observational science here? Because I would suspect you are. I mean, I would struggle to believe that a randomized controlled trial would be going on that had continuous measurements of those factors. So then you have to look at the follow-up and compare that and all that stuff. It's just there's too many variables that aren't being considered here.
Not up for dispute. The data there.
So what? Lack of evidence isn't evidence of lack. And what I mean by that is, well, just because other populations eating different foods haven't been studied and haven't actually been compared to these populations, their lifespan, their health span, that doesn't mean that it's unhealthy. The science just hasn't been done yet. More of it's coming out, a lot of it being absolutely atrocious. I've done a video exemplifying that. Link in the description. Well, not the description. Yes, the description, but also top right corner of the screen. Particularly surrounding that plaque begets plaque study by Nick Norwitz and company et al. That study shouldn't have even been conducted, frankly. Not great. It doesn't even stand a chance against the science they cite oftentimes. I should, you know what? Sometimes. Let's put it that way.
Super clear.
Super clear. So you see these absolutes he's using? Super clear. Undisputable. This is absolutely clear. Well, first of all, even then it really isn't, because there's a blue zone, for example, that, Okinawa, Japan. So actually there's a chance that you don't have to be eating this way to, get those perceived benefits, or really benefits that are perceived to be directly causally correlated with this omega-6 fatty acid variable here, purportedly by Simon and many others. You don't have to be. You don't have to be. But also, even if it were abundantly clear based on the evidence that we have, once again, lack of evidence isn't evidence of lack. And we covered that, didn't we? So, continue.
People will point to is mechanisms. They'll say, but Simon, oxidation, but Simon.
Well, hold on a minute, Simon. Are you going to sit here and pretend like oxidation isn't a mechanism that is observed on a systemic level in human beings? It's one thing to be reductionist in the area of cellular biology, which is why I don't really like looking at the literature in that field for mechanisms and the implications in diet and all that stuff. That's been used to determine unequivocally by the WHO that red meat is a carcinogen, or bacon even is a carcinogen or something like that. It's just really poorly done and ridiculous. However, there are certain mechanisms like oxidation that we absolutely know to be a practical concern, because we produce antioxidants, first of all. That's a sign. And also, oxidized LDL and its role in plaque buildup and formation in the arteries. we know how oxygen on a reductionist basis. Sure, we make composite inferences. We don't use any of these individual inferences in isolation to make our point. But oxygen itself has always been highly reactive. In fact, it seems that when we trace things back way far, plants were really the first organisms here, and they were exhaling, so to speak. They were releasing oxygen as a waste product. And other organisms, the mitochondria somehow came into the picture, and they were the first organisms, organelles, really. They're organelles in us, but the first life form that had the task of using oxygen as its fuel source. So it had to, from the mitochondrion came many, and then an organism that sort of serves the mitochondria, you can think of us as, and all other organisms. They required a curtailing mechanism against the damage that oxygen causes, because it is extremely highly reactive. It forms covalent bonds and all that stuff, even with itself. I mean, O2, for example, it never really exists in O1 except in the mitochondria. There's a way that it separates it into atomic oxygen. So you're going to sit here and say that oxidation products aren't a problem? Things that expedite oxidation in your tissues?
Etc., etc., etc.
Yeah, because it is a problem. So, yeah, oxidation. I don't even know what else he said before that. I think it was something else. Inflammation. Yeah, because subsequent to oxidation is inflammation, because inflammation is a pre-programmed response that occurs in the body when it has perceived damage to tissues or a potential invading pathogen. So
these are simply that. They are mechanisms.
Yes, and in order to study a mechanism and really make a convicting claim about it being a practical concern, you have to see it on a broad scale. You have to study it on a broad scale. That's what science is all about. That's why these observational studies are done. Well, you know what? It's why randomized control trials are done. Observational studies are actually themselves hypothesis generating in most cases, by responsible scientists. If they're not responsible scientists, then they're used standalone as proof of something, which is what you just did in this video. But anyway, let's continue.
Have to have humility here.
Yes, Simon. Now, I want to believe that you are a humble person, like Rich Roll. I suspect. So I've heard. But let's continue.
For whatever reason, and it doesn't really matter, these mechanisms do not pan out. Again, people who...
In what studies? Were they done for 2 weeks? What else were these people doing? What else were these people eating? Simon, we already covered this in the beginning. You see, the thing is it all goes back to what I just said at the very beginning of this. How long have our genes evolved to withstand aldehydes and a bunch of oxidation products that result from cooking the oil over and over and over and over again, and also from the manufacturing process and the selling process? Well, the pre-sale process of sitting out in sunlight and hot areas and climates all the time. How long were we exposed to those? And also the sheer amount of polyunsaturated fats that there are in absolute amounts, but also the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, which can be as high as 800 to 1 in the case of grapeseed oil, I've seen. Maybe 600 to 1. Who cares? That's exorbitant. Okay. Now you can say that, oh, well, that's not really a concern to me because there's no proof that those are harmful in the area of human nutrition science. To which I'd say, well, you are correct, because whenever you say proof, you're talking about, well, causality, which cannot be informed upon in the area of human nutrition science. Now, I know that if you're a new viewer to this channel, if you're of the opposite side of the aisle, I know that you might be thinking, well, that's a very convenient fact, isn't it? Or that's a very convenient statement, because that kind of exonerates your views in a way, like any view that you hold, because you can just say, well, you can't prove it. You can't prove it, right? Nothing can be proved. So therefore, it's a way of getting your sort of viewpoint, your ideological position on the same level as everyone else's, which, as much as that's the result of that, because it is the result of it, right? That is the result of it whenever you're basing all of your views on human nutrition science, or at least measuring the integrity of certain claims on a foundation of solely human nutrition science. As much as it's true and that's the outcome, it doesn't mean that just because that's the outcome, that is why I'm doing it. I'm not doing it with malice aforethought. I'm not doing it in a manipulative way in order to sort of approximate the outcome that I'd like. The facts are facts. I wish it weren't true, and I actually mean that because I am a human being, and humans overall do not like chaos. We're not a creature that enjoys chaos. We don't like that. And so we like to really establish our beliefs as fact, as unequivocal truths, even at the expense of responsibility. It's one of the major themes on this channel that I talk about. It's just the idea that it's just the fact that people will try and establish order in areas of chaos because of the overwhelming desire of human beings to establish order, that they will actually do so even when it's not responsible to do so. And the most abstract example of this, that is also the most prevalent example of this, is conflating correlation with causation. Even the people that will say correlation doesn't equal causation, they don't even realize that half the time that they're talking, they're doing that exact same thing. They're doing the exact same thing. They're conflating it with their language. Oh, your risk of this going up, your risk of developing this goes up if you eat this. It's like, yeah, but that's a cause and effect state. No. You looked at an association from a study that was conducted on 12 people due to ethical barriers. So no statistical power, no sufficient statistical power at all, for over a 2-week period, that were genotypically and phenotypically different from each other, different age groups, sometimes even different sexes, and all doing different things. Lack of control. And then you have a poor signal to noise ratio that's oftentimes less than 2. Sometimes you get the noise swamping out the signal, and precisely because of low sample sizes, but also sometimes because the thing you're studying there's no strong signal you're going to derive even in a large sample size because they're not related, right? That's always the risk that you're taking whenever you're performing a study or conducting one. And they also can't be repeated, or they're not even attempted to be repeated. I mean, if you base inferences off of that, especially when you make them causal, oh boy, you're really screwing up there. So,
more of these fats are healthier. So,
okay, but that's an association, and that has nothing to do. That's a very weak association. It really is weak. Lack of evidence is an evidence of lack. So we're in the realm of logic now, as opposed to empirics, because those are two different things. Logical truths are borne out in properly conducted empirical studies, but if they haven't been done, it doesn't refute the logic. That's not how that works. So
either these mechanisms that people point to are wrong, incomplete, or there's a whole host of other mechanisms, other pathways with positive effects.
Yes, that is always a possibility as well when it comes to science. You have to look at the net. You can't look at things in isolation. The first thing that comes to mind is this idea that gluconeogenesis, the process by which the body produces glucose from non-glucose precursors, so it produces all the carbohydrates you need for survival, at least in a human being, and in hypercarnivores, other hypercarnivores. Hint, hint, wink, wink. It is coined as is inefficient. It's an inefficient process. And the reason for that is because when you look at the pathway in isolation, it takes lots of GTP, ATP. GTP is basically energy equivalent to ATP. It takes many units of those to produce one molecule of glucose. So the idea is that, well, for every glucose molecule that you're deriving and creating, you're expending a lot of energy, so to speak. Except that whenever you actually take a step back, you realize, well, when is gluconeogenesis primarily being relied on for glucose needs? Well, when you're not consuming glucose. Well, when you're not consuming glucose and carbohydrates, what is your body using to create ATP? Well, it's using fat and ketones. You can really just say fat because ketones are created from fat. So let's just keep it simple. It's using fat to create energy. Well, it just so happens that per 16 carbon chain fatty acid, you produce a net of 129 net ATP. And so, well, I mean, is it really inefficient in the overall context of the body? Sure, you're spending a few GTP, ATP, whatever to produce glucose. But how much are you producing for every single 16 carbon chain fat? That's one fat. Think about that for a second. One fat. So is it really inefficient in the overall system? Well, doesn't seem so. So yes, you're correct. You have to look at the net result. You have to look at things in context, which is why using these mechanisms on their own, those are hypothesis generating. They have to be borne out in studies for you to be able to use these studies to support unequivocally that they are harmful through those mechanisms. Or at the very least, produce net harm. Net harm is really the thing that we should be looking at. Unfortunately, human nutrition science can't inform upon that. And so I think always the inference, the broader the better. The best inference we have is what I said in the beginning. How long have our genes evolved to withstand that synthetic material effectively? Well, very little of an amount of time. Extremely little. I mean, you're talking a little over 100 years, a little over a century. And that claim assumes that we were consuming a constant amount during that entire time period. Over the course of a very small time period, so let's say a little over a century, let's say 125 years, it's not like we were even consuming the same amount. The line looks like this. Okay, we weren't consuming that much in the beginning when they were out, and then it just continued to get more and more and more, especially in the 1970s, whenever the fear-mongering around fat and cholesterol really solidified itself as an endemic belief across the Western world and really the entire world at this point, because America, the empire, the global empire, right? So whatever our opinions are, oh, well, then everyone's going to adopt them because they must be correct. Yeah, like we don't have our own corruption. So look, we're all people at the end of the day. So
results in a net positive effect.
Yes, net positive effect. Now, notice those words, positive and effect. Effect is the conjugate of cause. You cannot inform upon that in human nutrition science. You can base opinions off of it. You cannot be convicting. You cannot be convicting. Well, let me correct myself. You can, but it would be irresponsible according to the scientific method and according to actually truth itself, which is the underlying logic of the universe that holds constant irrespective of perspective. That is what truth is. So
consume these oils and you consume omega-6 fats. Nutrition science and chronic disease is
nutrition theology. And chronic disease, what?
And it's multifactorial.
It's complex and multifactorial. Absolutely correct. In fact, that is not just human nutrition science. That is all of science. Science can inform upon a lot less than people would like it to. A lot less.
Pointing the finger at seed oils as the root cause of disease.
Well, I didn't do that. There might be certain people. In fact, I would actually say that does seem to be a very common viewpoint. However, at the same time, most of the people that are denigrating seed oils exclusively, they're actually not exclusively denigrating seed oils. They're denigrating all pollutants, environmental toxins, endocrine disruptors, things like that, synthetic anything. So these people are like the homesteader, crunchy mom types that actually still believe in eating vegetables. They still believe in eating carbohydrates as long as it's homemade, traditionally made, and pre-industrial revolution, specifically technological revolution, which was the second industrial revolution. So that's a step in the right direction, and I'm not pretending it's not, but it also depends on who you are. Some people can actually get away with having some seed oil laden whatever in isolation. Well, fine, but they can't have gluten or else they'll throw up. I actually have a friend like this. So it still depends on the type of person you are. So that's why I say just a step in the right direction isn't sufficient to saying, well, then that's the answer, right? That's just not how it works. But anyway.
Offers a simple explanation for people who feel uncomfortable with the complexity of the problem, or at least that's the only way that I can explain the constant demonization of this food group, of these fats.
Oh, well, seed oils are not a food group. They're not a food group. I mean, that's taken it. That's actually an even further step. I hope you misspoke, because you then just followed up with saying these fats.
Despite the data, I am
okay. So once again with the data, Simon, you already covered that one.
Excited to share an exclusive offer with the Proof community. predictive market. Others are essential for run out.
All right. Well, actually, I mean, I didn't realize it was that short of a video. The rest of it was an advertisement, which I don't know how I feel about that one. It's a 4-minute and 29-second video, and the first half of it was the only one with was the only one relevant to the question. The rest of it was an ad. Fine, whatever. Maybe it wasn't up to him. He's probably got marketers working for him. It's a business at the end of the day. But yeah, so no. My message to you, my dear viewer, is don't consume seed oils at all. Don't do that. In fact, there's many things that you shouldn't be consuming, which is why I recommend buying my book Contrainidicated. Or you know what? Even just to make it even easier on you, binge my channel. Because I've talked about this for a very long time now. A very long time meaning, well, since January 20th of 2024, last year. So I guess it depends on what you mean by long time, right? Long is a relative term. Blah, 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 whatever. That's how my brain is wired right now. It's, flip the gear. Simon flipped those gears on in my brain, the articulate, the meticulous, the analytical side of me. But anyway, because then you'll understand what those foods are, what to avoid, and how to live a more indicated lifestyle and to feel better. And not just for yourself, but also for the sake of your family and friends, to be a happier person around them. Because no one wants to be around someone miserable. And I know that from personal experience as being a miserable person with my health. So anyway, I recommend buying that. A closer look and revision of mainstream health axioms that have perpetuated illness, disorder, and disease for over a century. So with that being said, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, what are you doing? Now's your chance. I see you. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. And also, there are a lot of morons online. I'm sure that if you've watched my channel long enough, you understand that. Or maybe you already knew that to begin with. And if so, good on you for noticing that. And it's important, and it's actually incumbent upon us that are actually rational and logical to combat the nonsense. But oftentimes it's hard because people appeal to authority. Oh, this coach says this doctor says this. Well, that is why I think it is incredibly important for us to get some credibility under our belt that actually means something. And fortunately for you, I have an ability for you to do that. Linked in the description below, that being a carnivore certification program. Now, what does that meretricious, dressed up language mean? Well, let me tell you. This is a program that is designed to get you internationally accredited through institutions as a nutrition coach. Because if you didn't know, legally you can just call yourself a coach and it means absolutely nothing. If I wanted to call myself a coach and be a coach, well, right now I can just call myself a coach and whoa, that's crazy. That's magic. I'm a coach now. Well, unfortunately, that's how most of social media is today. Most people just calling themselves coaches and calling themselves authority figures when in reality they aren't even authority figures. So putting aside appeal to authority, they're not even authorities in the first place. But this program is different. This allows you to actually be accredited through institutions, which allows you an easier time acquiring insurance and many other things, actually. And fortunately, we have a program that is designed to get you accredited. And not only does it get you accredited, it has modules from myself. It has modules from Dr. Abs. And also it is run by carnivore coach Peter, whose socials are in the description below, who I recommend getting in touch with for negotiating a plan to attend this program in the first place. We have stopped sales for summer, but if you apply now, you can get on the waiting list for September, which I think is, well, incredibly useful because we need more coaches that actually know what they're talking about in the space. Because as much as appealing to authority is a fallacy, it doesn't change the fact that most people will still appeal to authority. So you might as well make authority mean something. Finally, we don't just have a nutrition coach certification. We now have just opened up a new fitness certification part of the program. In the program, however, we are taking only 10 people right now to join that certification. or really that aspect of the certification program, between the months of September and October. So there are limited spots available. There is scarcity involved. So get down there and message Peter very quickly so that you don't miss your opportunity to actually be a soldier in this fight. So, with that being said, join me next time when we are reacting to, wow, a refreshing, a breath of fresh air of humility from Simon here. Or the exact opposite of that from other people like Lane Norton or Paul Saladino. So, till then.